It is close to a railway line, and there are prizes to recognise what the loco is for any train watchers amongst you. And the second thing is that if anybody who can spot the health and safety hazard midstream, then they can also get a brownie point. Here we go.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about now is how to rig up a laser pico. Same as any boat, the first thing you want to do when you're rigging up the boat is just check where the wind's coming to make sure the boat's pointing into the wind, so that when we rig her up, she's not going to be overpowered and capsizing on land. Okay, so check with my flag. Yep, my boat's set to wind. Next thing we need to do is put our mast in the boat. Okay. So a pico mast is just stepped in with a mast gate on the front of it. So making sure that you watch out for the end of the mast, onto an angle, into the bottom of the boat, making sure that your sleeve comes underneath the deck plate and slide it forward so that the mast gate comes across. Next thing we need to do is lock that off, and that's just with a simple T. Okay, so the pin goes down through the hole. Once it's in, we lock it off like so. Okay, so down through, all the way through, and make sure she's locked off and held in. Okay, that's our mast now in the upright position. Next we're going to move back to the rudder. Okay, so with the rudder, the first thing you need to make sure is that the rudder blade comes underneath your horse or your traveller. So make sure that comes over and your tiller bar over the top. Okay, just at the back of the boat, the same with all the other boats. You've got a set of pin tools and gudgeons. Line them up and pop them in and make sure that retaining clip just hooks her on and that she is underneath your traveller. Okay, with our boom, very simple. At the front, we've got a horseshoe that just sits above the black plate on the mast. So all we're going to do is hook her on like so. Next job is to unfurl the sail. Just a little ribbon hook onto the sail. And then unwrap that all the way. And she's furled out. Okay? Making sure that the little D-ring is facing towards the back of the boat. Work your way along the sail. Okay? Until you've got your back cringle. Don't worry about the little bit ribbon. You're looking for the cringle. And on our boom, we've got our outhaul with one bit of elastic and the rest rope. On there is a hook. All we're going to do, making sure that our hook reaches the cringle, is hook along like so. Next thing we need to do is tighten up our outhaul. So all you do is pull the side of the line without the elastic on towards the mast. When you've got it as tight as you want it, into the climb plate on the top of the boom. Okay, and that's our outhaul set. Next thing we need to do is attach our kicking strap. Okay, so make sure she's loosened up. The D-ring that we mentioned a moment ago, that's where that clips onto. And then just a simple pull to tighten her up. Your main sheet should all be attached, but just make sure that that's running freely. And finally, the last thing we'll do is put our dagger board through the slot and we're ready to go.
Okay, what's missing from there is details of.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about.
Details of the rigging of the main sheet, because I understand that the main sheet isn't set up on the picos in the yard. So I've just done this little diddy diagram for you. This is the horse, the green rope at the back, and then you've got the two main sheet blocks, one on the end of the boom, one on the horse, and you've got the kicking strap over on the right there. And then these two blocks take the main sheet back into the main center of the cockpit. So I'll just demonstrate. There's a tiller going underneath the horse. And then the line comes from the end of the boom, round the block, up to the end of the boom again, to the middle of the boat, down to the block in the cockpit, and then through the jammer. Okay. Are there any questions about that? I mean, as I say, what we will do is we'll send out an email with the links to that particular video along with the other one that's in the pack. Yeah, all seems pretty good. Right, okay, we'll move on. So the 5 essentials, this really is where you move on from basically going on a broad reach backwards and forwards between two buoys when you start to understand how the mechanism of sailing works. And they split this up into balance, trim, daggerboard, sail set, and course made good. Now I'm going to talk in detail about sail set and course made good after this video, but I would hope that most of you can appreciate the first three fairly easily with the video that's coming. It's given by Shirley Robertson.
Sailing's a dynamic sport. Everything's changing. The wind, the water, and the direction our boat's going. We have a checklist of 5 essentials, which really means that we get the best out of our boat in all conditions. The most important is balance, and that means keeping the boat level as much as possible. In later courses, we will learn how to use heel to improve speed, but for now, keep the boat flat.
So I'm just going to pause that just so that you can digest it. As I say, there's 5 essentials, so I'll just pause them briefly at the end of each one.
Fore and aft trim is also important. Sit too far back and the stern drags and the bow is way out of the water. In the right position, the whole length of the boat is sitting nicely on the water, but too far forward and the bow digs in and the rudder lifts up. In the correct position, the boat will feel much easier to steer. The third of the 5 essentials is the position of the daggerboard. If you want to sail...
Okay, and I think the best way to learn about trim is probably to practice it. So move to the back of the boat, particularly in something like a Pico, where it's relatively easy to do. You're on your own. You can appreciate what's happening to the boat and the way that the boat changes its stance and the reaction to that. And I would just move forward and aft in the boat to understand, you know, what's happening. And you can look at the bubbles over the stern if the stern is digging in too much. And indeed, you can feel how that changes as the further forward in the boat you go.
Wind, it should be right down, giving maximum side force. Lift the daggerboard about a third if you want to go reaching across the wind. The extra speed will give the same side force with less board in the water. But halfway to go downwind. Sailing downwind, you don't need much sideways resistance from the board, and so raising it up will reduce drag and you'll sail even faster.
Okay, I think the thing about the daggerboard, particularly going downwind, the key thing there is to have enough daggerboard to grab hold of if the boat capsizes. So, you know, a plank of wood will go quite happily downwind without any keel or daggerboard whatsoever. But the key point is that if you do capsize, you want to be able to retrieve that daggerboard. So don't ever push it so far up that you can't get hold of it if you're in the water to get back onto it and recover from the capsize.
Of the 5 essentials is sail setting. As you go from one course to another, you also need to adjust your sail settings. Here I'm sailing close to the wind with the sail in tight. I'm now easing the sail out, turning onto a reach, and then easing the sail out more. And now I'm on a run, projecting as much sail area as I can towards the wind.
finally, when you're learning to sail, it's very easy to have all your focus on what's going on in your boat. But remember to check your steering. Make sure you're actually going where you want to go. We'll call this course made good.
Okay, as I say, there's a lot packed into those 2 minutes, but we'll give you the links and you can run through those. There's a whole set of videos actually done by Shirley Robson, and they're all equally well made and to be recommended. So we're just going to talk now about sail set and course made good in particular, because I think they're probably the two things that, you know, if you're on the improver curve, this is really where things will get better for you. If you're pointing dead head to wind, the sails are obviously going to flap. And then if you bear off the wind, you'll get to an angle which is about 45 degrees for the boats that we sail, when the sails will just fill. And that's what you see in this diagram on the left. So if you're then on a reach, actually all you're doing is you're turning the boat, but the sails themselves will see the same angle of wind. So you can see that I haven't altered those sail directions relative to the wind at all. All that's happened is that you've eased the main sheet out to give you that angle that is the set when you're close hauled. So that's a beam reach. And if we were sort of halfway between close hauled and a beam reach, again, the angle of the sails relative to the wind direction are identical. Okay. Now going downwind, as I said to you before, you know, pretty much anything will go downwind given half a chance. So there's nothing sophisticated about it. And indeed, like I said, a plank of wood with a square sail will go downwind. And indeed, we copy that in a dinghy by goose winging and presenting the biggest sail area to that wind coming over the back of the boat. Okay, course made good. So I'm going to try and relate this to what we have in the River Hamble, because at the end of the day, the best sailing is probably outside the river. So you want to be able to get out of the river. In this particular circumstances, we've got a 2-knot tide coming in, okay, which is not unusual. And you've got a few options. You can obviously go down the middle of the river if you so desire, but you're not going to win any medals by doing that because you're presented with the greatest strength of tide against you. So you can either then therefore go down the Hamble side, the north side of the river, or you can go down the east side, the Warsash side. And they both have their pros and cons, and a lot of that has to do with the wind direction. You know, there's a lot of, for example, a lot of trees on the Warsash side that can slow the flow down. And you've got, for example, the lifeboat pier here that also disrupts the flow of air. And you might find that it's easier sailing out of the river down the Hamble side in those circumstances. We're talking generally about lighter wind conditions, which is the sort of thing that we will meet most evenings. And you can see that we can sail just outside the deep water. Indeed, on the Hamble side, we can probably sail quite happily inside the red marks. It's important to note, and I'll come on to this later again, that there are some shallow patches around on the Warsash side, and these do shift from one year to the next. And you'll certainly know it if you hit the shingle beach. So just be a bit careful where you go close into shore. Okay, I'm now going to talk about rules of the road. And I think the emphasis this year in particular is probably on the words I've used here is might is right. And I suppose what I'm saying is that theoretically, we as sailors are the stand-on vessel in most circumstances. However, I think this year the river will be particularly busy. And I think we just have to be a little bit more cautious about the way that we use that rule in the river in particular. So I'll come on to that in detail. We've obviously got the port and starboard rule where we've got boats on different tacks. And we've also got the windward and leeward situation. So I'll talk through each of those in detail now. Okay, so on the river, some of the boats that are going down the river are sort of 60 feet long. That's almost, well, it is a quarter of the width of the river. So if that boat ends beam on to the main flow of traffic, that is going to cause quite a blockage within the river. And it's something that must be prevented at all costs. So it's our responsibility, as well as their responsibility, to act accordingly. Also, a lot of these powerboats that are that size have a minimum speed. You know, when they put their 5,000 horsepower or whatever it is they've got underneath them in gear, they will be doing 3 to 4 knots. There is no trickling along at 1.5 knots. They will be doing 3 to 4 knots. Obviously, the visibility and awareness of what's going on around them is limited. Now, they may well see you over the bow of your boat, over the bow of their boat rather, but they are completely unaware of what is behind them. They will not have that visibility. So they could be quite nervous about altering course rapidly to avoid you because they aren't sure what is behind them and what might be overtaking. There's also going to be a lot of occasions where these boats have a lot of people on them, which is, you know, distracting for the skipper. And inevitably, you know, with a lot more boats on the water, this variation in skill level will also be significant. So I'm just asking people to be a little bit more cautious this year in particular from what they may have been in the past. So in the river, we've got, you know, boats keeping to the starboard side of the channel, whether they're coming in or going out. So we'll be setting off from the pontoon, which is around here, and we might be able to go dead downwind, in which case we might find it quite easy to stay out of the main shipping channel, and the main channel. And these green buoys indicate the main channel. So anything to the towards the Hamble side is the main channel. We would find it quite easy to stay out of that. If we're tacking out of the river, we've got two choices. And the one I've got shown here is my preferred one, really. And that is you can use the gaps in the traffic that is coming into the river to take slightly longer tacks and to make progress towards the entrance. But where you start meeting traffic, then instead of, you know, saying that it's your right to go ahead, you can put a short tack in, or indeed tack between the pontoons on the Warsash side. When a gap appears again, you can take a longer tack and so on. And ultimately, when you escape this constricted area between the mid-channel pontoon and the Warsash race box, you can then use Kipper Pond to full effect, as long as there's water in there. An alternative is to do short tacks down by the pontoon in the middle of the river. But I wouldn't recommend this because generally people are coming up behind you, so it's taking them longer to overtake. And also, it's a very hard barrier on both sides. There aren't any escape options for you. And a lot of powerboats don't recognise how or why a boat tacks to windward to get out of a river. So it will be quite a surprise to them to suddenly see it changing course by 90 degrees. Okay, so port and starboard. If the wind's coming over the port side of the boat, then you are the giveaway vessel. And if the wind's coming over the starboard side, you are called the stand-on vessel. And they use the word stand on rather than a right of way for very good reason. That is because at all costs, collision should be avoided, okay? So you have no right to stand on. And I realise, labouring this. Okay, windward and leeward boat. If you're the boat closer to where the wind is coming from, then you're the one that has to give way. Conversely, if you're further away from where the wind is coming from, you can stand on. And this is one which is where we're looking at the comparative strength of each of those rules of port and starboard and windward and leeward boat. Here we've got a boat that is on starboard tack because the wind is coming over the starboard side of the boat and hitting the mainsail. And that boat is the stand-on vessel, even though it is to windward of the other boat. So the starboard hand tack vessel is the stand-on vessel. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about tides, and we've got a very good capability in the Southampton water with BrambleMet, which is a website which gives a readout most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, of wind strength and tidal height. And it's historical, so it is accurate for that day. So, and this is just purely something that I would do. I would quite often get this up just before I go sailing, whether it's a race or a WOW meeting. And it's, as I say, historical. So I've picked this up at about 5:30. And the important thing to remember is that what happens 12 hours previously, give or take 3/4 of an hour, is what is going to happen now. So in other words, at about 7:30 to 7:45 in the evening, this will be where the tide is at that point in time. So for example, here we can see that at 9:30 in the morning, or say 10 o'clock, 10:15 at night in the evening, it is the start of what I would call the stand. So that's when there's no tide in the river, it's high water. And that stand will last for 2.5 to 3 hours. It doesn't start to dip away until about, in this case, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or about 1:30, 1:45 the following morning. And that's really useful to know, because where you've got no tide, and you've got a lot of water, your options are immense. And this is good if you ever go sailing from the Hamble River on your own, in other words, without rescue cover. I would always recommend that you use this period of tide, of this tidal stand, to good effect. And obviously, much after 1:30, you get the tide flooding out. So, life's going to become a bit more difficult for you. And obviously, at around 3:30 in the afternoon, that's when you've got a long drag up the pontoon to get the boat back to the top. Okay, so let's just look at some circumstances. I've got these slightly out of order actually, but I don't think it matters that much. But so let's just have a look at the river in detail. We've got, in this case, tide flowing strongly out of the river, and we've got some hazards here, which is we've got very strong tides in certain areas. That's off the lifeboat pier. We've got some shallow water just inside this post here, which is number 9. And that will always exist. It doesn't matter on which year it is, but it will always be shallow in that area. So it's worth always going outside pile 9. And we've got some slack water in the entrance here. So this is to seaward of the double pile, the Dolphin, if you like, which has got the speed sign on it. There's enough water most of the time to utilise the area either side of the main channel to your benefit. And these are what the effect of the tide is as well. If you've got water rushing out of the river, there will usually be quite a strong eddy on the Hamble side, and you'll get a weaker eddy, or probably not an eddy at all, but just certainly slacker water close to the shallow ground on the Warsash side. So let's put that together. Yeah, actually, that's a good point. An eddy, what's an eddy? Well, an eddy is a body of water that's going in the opposite direction to the main tide. So the main body of water is going out in this example, but an eddy will be going back into the river on the Hamble side, just outside the post, the main channel. So your options, similar to if the tide was coming in and we were trying to get out, is to escape to the sides of the channel where there's less tide or indeed an eddy. And similar to what I said before, if you go out on the Warsash side, you'll quite often find turbulent air around where the lifeboat pier is. If you go out on the Hamble side, you'll quite often end up with a beneficial eddy, which will drag you into the river entrance quite successfully. And the two are about, I don't know, 60-60, 50-50 really in what you choose. Sometimes you can gain by using the eddy and not having the turbulent air. Sometimes you can gain on the Warsash side simply because you're not having to cut across the strong tide on the at the double post. Okay, right. Just a quick chat about weather. I'm just showing 3 websites there. Well, this is the Met Office app. I'm sure a lot of you will have this, and the key thing about it with all these that I'm showing you here is that they show the gust strength, and that's not something that might happen. The gust is quite often something that will happen. And a couple of things there. Obviously, the stronger the gust, that's going to have an influence on the boat, but equally also the difference between the gust and the normal wind strength will give you an indication of how difficult it will be under those circumstances, because it's the suddenness of the gust and the strength compared to the, if you like, more normal winds that will cause the surprise to everybody. And that is true of the Met Office app, and also another one I've got here called Wind Guru. It will give both figures. The BBC weather app will not give the gust strength. BrambleMet is historical data, and again, it's giving good information on the gust and the mean wind strength. And the key thing here is, because we do a lot of sailing in the evenings, sorry, the Tuesday night gang obviously do, then quite often what you're interested in is how rapidly the wind is dying off. So you might arrive and you might look at the wind strength and it might be gusting 20 knots, which might be towards the upper end of your limit. Have a look at BrambleMet and you might find that it's starting to decrease. And if that corresponds to what the other apps, the forecasting apps are saying, that the wind will decrease, say, from 7 o'clock in the evening. If you're starting to see that trend on the actual data at BrambleMet, then that is good data, and you can be assured that the wind will continue to ease. And it's a good point to start getting your boat ready, and you can go out in more benign conditions. There are obviously other apps. There's windy.com is another one. There are quite a few, and I'm sure some of you will have your favorites. Okay, I'm just going to talk about beaching and coming alongside now. And again, I'll try and relate it to what the circumstances are that we find in the river. So here's our pontoon. And new for this year is some rib pontoons that are going in on the upstream side of our pontoon at Stone Pier. And how do I put this? That they will constrict the amount of room that you're used to by probably about 2.5 meters. Perhaps more importantly, psychologically, they don't look quite as pretty as the side of a boat because there'll be the engines, the propellers of ribs hanging over, staring at you. What I would say is that you should obviously be more cautious. You will have less room. If it looks as if it's getting busy in there, in other words, you've already got 2 boats in there trying to do a jibe under constrained conditions, it's probably not a good idea to join them. Okay, so just use your common sense, tack away and wait. I'll come on to other ideas a little later, not to try and preempt things too much. So one option, obviously, is if you've got the wind coming down the river, you want to approach it from the downwind side so that when you come alongside, first of all, the boom is flogging quite merrily away from the pontoon and the sails are able to flap. You'll notice key point here is I've released the kicking strap. The kicking strap is the power, a means of altering the power in the boat, and it's very effective. So try and remember to let the kicking strap go. It will help you a lot, particularly in something like a Pico. Another option is to come down on the windward side. And to be honest with you, this is almost always what I do personally, not trying to give away any secrets, but it basically means that if you come on the windward side, you've got to drop your mainsail first. Now, that's not necessarily an easy thing to do in windy circumstances in a Pico when you're on your own. However, in light winds, it's entirely possible to release the kicking strap and release the out haul on the end of the mainsail so that the sail can flap. To make progress, all you need to do is grab a handful of the sail in your hand and create some windage. Key point here is always do that upwind of the pontoon. And as was pointed out by Jan on last Tuesday when we ran through this, obviously if the tide's running really strongly, you might struggle to reach the pontoon. But if the wind is as light as that, you might be able to come alongside the pontoon with the sail set. But I would not advise it unless the wind is really light. But that is something that I generally always do, certainly on a race night. I go to windward of the pontoon, I drop the sail and come in under my jib. Okay, so this is the last item.